Christian Berg is the CEO of the AllBright Foundation, which is in Berlin and Stockholm. Christian is economist by training, then worked in the diplomatic service, and now basically is the CEO of this foundation, and he's the perfect person for our transfers activities. I think these are the people we want to reach with our research, and that you basically then reach the public and change things. So that's great to have you here. Yeah? Nicola Fuchs-Schündeln, the internal guest, president of WZB and professor of macroeconomics in Frankfurt. Her research fits very well the topics, macro and gender, and in your research you have linked it to topics, yeah? So that's why it's ideal to hear you here. So we are glad to have you on the podium, and we are even more happy that you're in Berlin now. So great to have you. Good. Everybody knows inequality on the gender dimension is still persistent. Yeah? So despite we have seen some progress in the last years, we still observe a gender pay gap of roughly 16% in Germany, and that's true in most countries in the OECD. Yeah? So there is still an inequality here, and now we want to discuss actually why this is, what the problems are, and what we can do. Yeah? Before we go to the why and the solutions, I want to start with actually what the problem is. Yeah? So what are the consequences? Why do we care that we have this persistent inequality? Why does it matter? And given that we focus on the macroeconomy here, I don't want to discuss too much in detail why it's bad for women that they have less in their pocket. I mean, that's bad to start with, but I think we know a lot about this. So I want to focus more, and that's the first question to you, Nicola. So what does it mean for the macroeconomy? Why is it kind of, what are we losing by paying women less?
By having women not more involved in the workforce and finding few women, especially in the upper skeletons, in the corporate world, in science, in politics, so wherever you look at, because that means we have a lot of untapped talent. So we have a lot of talented women who would be very good leaders, but never get into these positions where they really can bring their talent to the full potential. And there is a very nice paper that was published in Econometrica a few years ago that shows, based on a macroeconomic model, that around 1/3 of the entire US GDP growth over the last 60 years is due to the stronger involvement of women in the labor market. And the story intuitively is that if you think back in the 1960s, around 95% of lawyers and doctors, for example, were male. Nowadays, it's around half-half. So clearly, women have the potential to be very good lawyers and very good medical doctors, but in the 60s, they couldn't do that because they didn't have the potential to go to universities to the same extent. And then also in the labor market, often firms wouldn't even hire them. Even some female Supreme Court judges, they report back of how difficult it was for them to get their first jobs. So the economy didn't use this potential, and that is what really, I think, is detrimental to growth. We want everyone to bring him or her talent into the labor market. That is what generates growth, and we don't do that to the extent possible for women.
So this is on the country level, but when we zoom in more into the firm level, right? I mean, probably the same argument applies, but I think you can say this more specific, right? So what are firms missing out by having this inequality? And I think, as you said, it's not only the inequality in participation, it's really the inequality in rewards, right? So that we bring the women to the top. So what can you say in the terms of the firm's perspective here?
Well, I will start a bit like Nicola. I mean, we've seen the whole OECD, women are better educated since a long time. And the companies, they're always saying, we want the best one, we want only the ones that can bring us to the top, but they don't get them. And that's the problem. Because most companies saying, yes, we're open to talent, we want the women. And maybe at the start, they get the talents, but some way during the promotion ways up, the women are lost. And the companies, of course, loses, I mean, quite a lot. There's many studies showing that diverse teams are more productive, are more open to innovation, are more focused. And if you look at the education, and the women are also have been studying economy, they have been studying law, they have been studying all the things that you need to get up to the top, business administration. And I think there we have a problem in the companies because they are not seeing that really. The companies are dominated by men, and the men seeing that what they have been doing is probably what that you should have to get to the top. And they might not see that the talented woman, they're saying maybe she's not ready, and therefore you miss out the productivity, the possibility to think new, and you also have big risks in the company, because if you only have people basically thinking the same, having the same education, being here in Germany, West German men, I mean, of course, then you run into problems like groupthink, and you make forced decision because you don't think, you don't understand your customers, you don't understand what's...
Yeah, I mean, this is already a bit the why, yeah? Why do we see this, right? But again, before we go there, do you, from your experience, do you have a kind of a positive example of a company or an institution where this has changed and where we see now more equality and thus more productivity and success?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can see, I mean, there's some, I mean, I'm coming from Sweden, there are some Swedish company that's been doing that for quite a long time, like Volvo or Spotify, but also German companies. It's all about leadership. I mean, if you want to have women on top, you can get them. I mean, it's a CEO topic. It's a topic of that you see, you actually promote the women. You have some good examples here, Allianz, Beiersdorf, they have constantly been promoting women, taking this issue as really from the CEO top, as not only nice to have, but also to change. Mm-hmm. And then you can see that the company are going very well.
Mm-hmm. Nicola, you mentioned it already that this also affects science, yeah? And I want to ask this more specifically, given that we are kind of an academic institution here, and loads of people here are in academic institutions, right? So what are we missing out in science, specifically in economics, that we still have this inequality in pay, in positions, and in leaderships?
I think we are missing out a lot, especially in economics. So a few years ago, when I was president of the German Economic Association, we wanted to understand better what is the share of women in economics, and also where do we lose them on the way to professorship. And we collected data from all the German universities. And what we found is that in economics, already starting out studying economics, the share of women is only around 35%. So in business administration, we are at more than 50% women. Economics attracts less women. And it's interesting, I was thinking, because we are social science, and other social sciences attract a lot of women. And I think, for me, the lesson is that we should make that clearer, that we really, as economists, we care about the welfare of people. We often measure the welfare in economic terms and monetary terms, but not always. But it's really, it's a social science. We care about society, so I think it should be attractive to women. And then we lose them basically going from, in the PhD level, it's still around the same, but then going on the postdoc level and then to the full professorships. And in full professorships, there are only 15%, so 15% women in economics still. And then you could say it's a pipeline problem, but we know from the US, from longitudinal data, it's not a pipeline problem, it's a leaky pipeline, so people drop out. And I think it's a problem because we want to understand the consequences, because we also see that that women and men tend to cluster in different subfields of economics. So, for example, in macroeconomics or in finance, there are far less women than in labor economics and in development economics. And that also means that certain questions, I think they don't get asked or they remain understudied. So it's some questions, they attract a lot of attention also in the public debate. I always found it very striking, that was some time ago when there was everything about the target 2 issues, which I think it's a very narrow topic of central banking, and it had so much public attention, and no one talks about the gender pay gap, which affects half of the German population. So that is kind of an example where you see the things we do research on, they also, I don't know, they are individual interests and they might be different, and I think also that it's very well shown that also the research questions we ask have something to do with the experiences we live in. And yeah, I just think we lose as a science if we don't have more diverse backgrounds. And by the way, I think that's not only in terms of gender, that's also in terms of where we recruit our students from, and also then our professors in terms of, I mean, international participation, but also different social classes participating very differently in academia or having very different success in academia.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, academics is one example, and I think if we go broader to the whole society, we'll find many examples where the kind of, lack of topics or lack of creativity, if it's just one group dominating, will be a big topic, right? So maybe from your experience and your work, if you go outside businesses, so what's your feeling kind of in other cultural disciplines and other in the society? Maybe starting positive, do you observe or do you can you give examples where kind of it is better, where it works, where there is more equality and therefore more creativity and a better outcome?
Well, you can see. I mean, I have coming from Sweden, been living there quite a long time, and what you could see in Sweden was that in the first, when the women started to get on the top or to get more up in the hierarchies, where you can combine family and working life, that you saw started in the public sector. Because there was, women started to be judges. I used to work in the Swedish foreign ministry. In the foreign ministry, I started was mostly men. Now it's a bit 50-50, 50% female ambassadors in the Swedish services, foreign policy. So you see, and then you have to compete. Also, the private companies must compete to get the talents with the public companies, the public administration. And that we see also very, very well when it comes to lawmakers, for example, that the judges are women in Sweden, but the lawyers are still men. And it's of course generalized, but it's a way. Also, we see it here in Germany the same. I mean, and I think there the private company must do to get those well-educated women. They have to change. They have to be ready to adapt. That's the more family friendly, but also more open to different attitudes.
Okay, so we already kind of have some ideas and arguments why we see this persistence, right? But Nicola, maybe you can tell us more about from your research about the role of norms, institutions, preferences, how we can separate this, and what we can say even as well if we compare across countries and institutions. Which are the institutions and rules which maybe help to reduce these gaps and then to provide more equality?
I think it kind of shifted over time, and what were the major hurdles that women faced. And if you look at the economic literature nowadays and where we stand nowadays, I think the literature identifies two main hurdles that are still relevant, and the one is motherhood. So a lot of the gender pay gap arises once women become mothers, and that is something we have to think about, and you were already alluding to that. So how can we better combine work and family, and what are the relevant institutions there? And the second big hurdle, and that is interesting, I think, is exactly norms. So what you also maybe also, you were saying preferences, and I always think it's important to distinguish between norms and preferences, because preference is something, I mean, I might innately be more or less risk averse than you are, so that it's maybe a preference, but a norm is kind of the social frame in which we kind of live, and we cannot choose it. And then many people say, well, norms are not that important. I mean, why do you care whether we live according to a norm or not? And in gender norms, it's just still a norm. As a man, you are expected to work full time. You are expected to earn the salary for the family. And as a woman, the norm is still that you are expected to take care of the child. Maybe you can do more, but still that is the primary role that we have in our minds. And what is important to recognize is that breaking these norms is really costly. So I think it's first psychologically costly because we are all social individuals, so you want to conform with the norm, so you want other people to say it's really great what you are doing and get this appreciation, and that is also kind of living with the norm that gives you more appreciation than if you live against the norm. And the second thing is, and that's the research showing very clearly, it has also real monetary costs. For example, there's a nice study also using Swedish data that shows that professional success increases the divorce probability for women, but not for men. And the authors very nicely trace this back to saying it's really a causal effect, so it's not correlational, it has nothing to do with selection, it also has nothing to do with the fact that women who are successful, they earn more money, and now finally they can divorce, which they might have already wanted to do before that. So they really can show very nicely that it's a causal effect. And then they say that that has to do with breaking this norm, right? So you become the main breadwinner in the family, and it's just not what people expect. It's not the normal situation, and that makes it harder for a couple. And a divorce clearly has psychological costs, but also monetary costs, and that is just one study that can show this very nicely. But I think these norms are really important, and then there are also studies that show that women, just as men, internalize this norm. So knowing that you will be expected and you will be evaluated this way, you adapt your behavior already before things come into place. So you might not even, before you have a child, you might not exert that much effort if you think, after I have the child, I will be expected to take care of the child, or my boss will not promote me as much anymore, not invest into myself that much anymore, because he or she might expect me to take a step back. So it's a very, I think we are in an equilibrium there that we have to get out of and get into a different equilibrium where it becomes more the norm that men and women really have the same choice set to choose from, or face the same constraints when they make their choices.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I mean, this shows, I mean, you're completely right that preference and norms is something different, right? But of course, they are strongly related, right?
Yeah.
And the same with institutions, right? So you only can change institutions, I mean, if the norms are ready to do this, right? I mean, if you compare now the Swedish and the German case, for instance, yeah, I think there we have different institutions, probably as well different norms, yeah? But would you say that in Sweden, kind of the situation is better?
Yeah, yes, I think so. At least we go into those kind of questions that we're discussing now for women taking part in the labor market and getting promoted on the high level. And I mean, I think, yes, I can agree with the norms, but it can change. I mean, Sweden and Germany, I've been working in both countries quite a long time. They're very similar in most respects. I mean, basically, the only big difference I found was this with women and men taking part in the working. I was working as a diplomat for Sweden for 10 years here, so I mean, this was really quite often discussing this. And I mean, in Sweden it was exactly the same before. There were the same norms. I mean, the women were staying home, working part-time, but it changed, and quite quickly, because the state wanted it to change. Yeah. I mean,
So you would say it was the government, the policy, you could change
yes,
it, yeah?
The policy decisions that you were taking in the 60s and the 70s in Sweden, I mean, one important decision was taken in 1971 in Sweden to abolish
Joint taxation.
Yeah. And introducing individual taxation. And that was extremely important. It was controversial at the time, but quite quickly people adapted. And the women are getting into the labor market. And then had a problem with the men, because they didn't do that. And then you have to talk about parental leave, and to get incentives to take parental leave. And now, I mean, it's embarrassing for a man not to take 6 months parental leave if you're a father. And is in Germany still controversial. Mm-hmm. And I think, I mean, I've been working in some other countries too. I mean, this what you're discussing here in Germany, it is very specific. I mean, these norms are very strong here. And I think that, unfortunately, the governments are not really ready to face, to try to change it. It's changing slowly, but I mean, you could also abolish this joint taxation here. You could also put more money into daycare centers. You can have schools that not finishing at 12 o'clock and things like that. I mean, then the norms changes. And of course, you have this Rabenmutter discussion here, that's the Raven mother. But it must be discussed, and must be. And I think in Sweden, at the end, the women were taking other decisions, and the men too, and that's also helped.
And I mean, this shows how difficult transfer is, right? I mean, I think there's so much evidence that joint taxation should be abolished and would help Germany a lot, right? I think there are a lot of people in the room here, including you, who have shown that. But still, it's very difficult to convey that to policymakers or even to the media. I mean, I think we have made progress on that, right? Even the Scientific Council of the Ministry of Finance has now acknowledged that it would be a good thing to do, kind of a conservative body, yeah? But still, it's not in place, and the new government didn't put that on the table, right? So, and I mean, life sounds simple here, so we can change it. Then we are like Sweden, but if that were true. But I think it's kind of it's nice to see that policy can influence something. So I think that kind of brings me to the key question we should discuss, right? So how can we improve the situation, specifically in Germany, right? And so we have seen one example of policy which Sweden did, yeah? So if we now kind of go to the present and to the next years, Nicola, what do you think can the government do, and what is likely that they will do? Probably not abolishing joint taxation, but do you see kind of other maybe incremental changes in policy which could help reduce these inequalities?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So first, I think incremental changes won't do that much, because what we need is exactly shifting these norms and shifting the perceptions, and for that you need a bit of bolder policies. So, and also, I mean, I did research on joint taxation myself, and you really see also in an international comparison the tax system of married couples that we have in Germany really creates a strong disincentive for secondary earner to participate in the labor market, and only Belgium has a similar disincentive effects. So among the European countries, we really stand out there, and so it's clear that you could do something. But also in my research, when I analyze this issue, I build a macroeconomic model and I calibrate it and then I simulate and so on. But it's all economic incentives effects that I'm capturing, keeping the norms the same. But I think what also, especially the sociological literature shows, is that with policy shifts, you also change norms, right? So you change the economic incentives, but you also change how people perceive how the world should function. And a very nice example is, and Katharina also did work on that, on when the introduction of the Elterngeld, that suddenly women, so that you were paid for 1 year, now you are paid for 1 year after giving birth to a child. And then when that was introduced, suddenly more women actually went back to work after the child was 1 year old. So afterwards, they were not paid anymore. Before it was introduced, they were also not paid. And still, now they go back. It's almost as if the government said, oh, we did a lot of research, and now we find that with 1 year old child really can go into a childcare center. Obviously, that was not the case. But it sends a signal it's okay to do that, which before it seemed not to be okay before a child was 3 years old. And I think, so you need these big changes also to get really from this one equilibrium to a different one, and that's what I'm thinking. Abolishing or even reforming the system of joint taxation would be a big signal, and I think even politicians understand it nowadays. It's just that the political, I mean, it's a question of whether they want to do it, and in there the conservative mindset obviously makes it harder because they care about re-election, and so and they are not very known for bold moves in general in the last few years in German politicians.
Yes.
Yeah, but that's interesting. What happened a long time ago in Sweden. It was not only the left who was wanting it. It was also the Liberal Party and the Conservatives, because they had a demand from the companies.
Yeah.
They needed the workforce. They wanted to have the woman to work in the companies because it was the same situation as here now. And that changed the minds of the Conservatives and Liberal parties and said, okay, now we have to do this because of the company needs the well-educated women.
Yeah. And in that sense, I think we do have a really window of opportunity now, because this labor shortage will become more extreme, it will be felt more, and that will also increase the political pressure to really think more about how can we get more work done. Migration, we know, has a lot of problems, so that gives me a bit of hope that we could see some stronger moves there, and it's not only joint taxation, it's also the mini jobs, which gives us incentives to really work few hours, and then I think what you were also mentioning, parental leave, and that you tie it equally to mothers and fathers. I think that would give us a huge push ahead in creating gender equality.
No, I mean, it's true that the role of firms is very important, right? But internally, the role of firms, you mentioned that before, right? So you still have quite often on the top these West German men, and they are not willing to change things, right? And maybe now with demographic change, they are forced to do. But what could be measures within the firms that it really changes? Is it just the pressure from outside, or is there something we could do inside?
Well, I think that this problem not getting talent, it's the big thing that might change the companies. I mean, and if you get a bit more modern persons getting to the top, we see it normally in German companies when you have CEOs coming from other countries that they might see it differently. And it's really, okay, I can't, really, the statistic is not that there's so many companies that you can see it really matters. But yeah, if you look on some single companies, you can really see it, it's important. And I think that's the shortage of labor, and also that you more women you actually come up, you tend to be a bit more in companies. The woman was good. All there's many male managers are saying, well, man, she's not ready yet, and that is changing in the coming. But I think it's you have to promote women for potential, and so often it's like this that women are said, yes, you're not ready yet, you should come later on. We have a chance for you. And maybe some of the women are saying, why should I wait so long? And why would I like to be promoted when there's only men there? But I think the necessity to have the well-educated people is there. And I see also companies, talking about this parental leave. Some Swedish companies, and also I see it in Germany, they are paying the woman and the man the full salary, or almost the full salary, for 6 months. That then they come back on full time. And this is a way, and that means that the male person and the female persons are leaving. Often, first 6 months the female person, and the second 6 months the father, and then they come back. And this is what the companies are doing too.
But still, sticking to the Swedish example, so the way I understood you earlier was, I mean, you have equality in terms of employment, more or less, but in terms of wages, you even in Sweden you have differences, right? So it seems, despite these political changes which we want to do and should do, you still observe these inequalities in Sweden. Is that correct?
Yes, not so big as here, but still is a gender pay gap. And I think it has quite a lot to do. I mean, it's quite. I mean, probably you know it here. Let's keep this famous study, Hyde and Howard study, psychological. That men and women are judged differently, and still they are. I mean, if you see a manager, also in Sweden, you think of a man, 50 years old, and that's also what you expected to see. And also when women come, they're maybe not accepted in the same way, and don't get the same wages.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is still persistent here, and yeah, we need these changes within firms probably to do this, right? We talked earlier about this example, I think, which Claudia Golding comes from a research that in some industries there were kind of production changes, if endogenous or not. I think we're not kind of on the same page here, or didn't. So, but if it's kind of if there's hope that basically the production function of firms changes such that more flexible work will be possible, and kind of not long working hours are necessary too. I think we have seen some developments in the past, but is there hope in this direction, you think?
Well, I think so too. I mean, we see that also from Swedish company or Swedish government where I used to work. I mean, if you tend to, in Sweden you work less hours, the individuals, than in Germany. But if you look on how much hours are worked, they are the same, because the women are working more. Because they don't need to take part-time in this respect, because you have shorter working hours. That you mean that you basically can, it's fully normally you can pick up your kids. If not you're a bus driver, but if you work in an office work, I mean, it's you don't have meetings after 16 hours and 4 p.m. and you tend to have this movement that bosses should leave early to show that it's fully accepted to have kids and to work shorter hours. Then you have this changes in using modern technique, and that's when it started before Germany maybe, so that you can reach people later on in the evening. You can work at 9 o'clock instead if you need that, and so on. But it's changing, and it means there's also a reason why more women are working.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Nicola, back to science. So we understand, we have seen what the problems are, and I think they're across countries, basically. So what do we need to do to change this?
To get more women into
so to
economics,
get more to the top in economics, specifically in other fields as well. So so from your experience in your various positions in the countries you have worked, so what do you think would be internal politics? Is it quotas? Is it better promoting people? So the mentoring we're doing, or do we need more drastic steps?
So I think first in science, I mean, we live in the same world as businesses, so all these government policies, they affect us just as they affect businesses, so this is still an important part. But then if you look more into the science world, specifically, I think I came to the conclusion over time that quotas are really helpful, because it takes a super long time to get somewhere if you don't have quotas, and you need some quotas again to shift maybe also this picture that we have in mind of how does a successful scientist look like, so that women really face less of these implicit biases and these hurdles, and also to encourage younger women to say, oh, this is actually a career track that that could be something for me, and I want to do that also in economics, but also beyond. So I think that is something that would be really helpful, and so that you have role models also that can kind of shift our perception of the entire field of science. And then mentoring, and so that there are lots of things you can do, like mentoring, and I think it is very important, but what I always want to stress, it's not that we only have to explain the young women how to play this game and how things should be done, but we have to think about how can we set up the system so that the women have the same chances to succeed. And so I think this mentoring, in a sense, it's more you tell people to adapt to the system, but we should ask how can we adapt the system so that it is there for all the people who have the talent to become very good scientists. And I think on that, again, there are many dimensions, but that is an approach that we shouldn't, we should focus on much more, I would say.
Yes,
yeah. I mean, I think for AllBright Foundation, we have focused on the men. Yeah. And the men have to change, and you have to adapt to the new situation, and that's the main reason. I mean, we have training for men only, and to try to involve men in the situation, because many men are thinking, "Oh, why should I do that? And it's a problem for me. I will have less career chances and so on." I mean, so as long as the men are not changing, you won't change it a lot. I mean, you have to work mainly with the men.
Interesting. That's a point to do, yeah. I should know, yeah. Good. So before I want to open the floor, I want to kind of discuss one further issue, and that's kind of namely the future, right? So we have big trends, the mega trends, so to speak, which will affect our lives in the next kind of 10, 20 years, yeah? And they may affect these differences as well in positive or negative way, right? So, and if we think about kind of technological change, right? AI, how this is working the labor market, right? So what is your kind of feeling? Is this kind of improving the situation, or is there a risk that actually with these new technologies we will get more inequality, more divergence between the gender?
Well, I guess for my, I mean, with the ideas, I had to feel a lot to do with the algorithms. How are they used, and how do they work actually? Because I mean, we know that many of these programmers, they are men. They have their male focus. Some of the algorithms have been discriminating, and so I mean, you have to get the women involved also in these changes, and also have the women on high position, also in the research.
Okay, this is for the production, right? But then, of course, the labor market is changing because of AI, right? So it's now easier to work from home, for instance, right? So is this, Nicola, thinking kind of work from home, for instance, is this kind of a possibility combining family and work, both for fathers and for mothers, to get more equality?
So I think, yeah, what we know is that women tend to value hours flexibility and flexibility in the work domain more than men, and they are also willing to take more wage cuts to get this, and a lot of these technologies give more flexibility, like work from home, which is easier now. I think also digitalization in principle, if you use it smartly, should make it much easier to share positions. So to have two people on part-time being in a leading position rather than just one person. So that was all this technological change that goes away from one person doing long hours and making it easier to divide the same work on more heads who do less hours. I think that is per se beneficial to women. So in that sense, these technologies, they are a chance for women. But then I think in the more medium run, we will see how this plays out. For example, work from home, which is then more used by women than for men. So how does it affect promotion chances? So how important is it still that you have these informal discussions? So I think that these are things that we don't know yet, and where I'm a little bit more skeptical that it's really so beneficial for women as it might look like in the short run. But again, there, I mean, I am with you. It's also like, how do you use the technologies? And I think if as a firm you make a real effort and you say, we want to use these technologies available to make it easier for women to make it to the top, I think then they do provide a lot of potential.
May I just comment? Because I mean, I think the same as you, and the home office is as a start a good thing, but it could also be a trap for women.
Yeah.
Because I mean, women tend to work everything in the household, taking care of the kids at the same time as they work. The men are not doing that when they're having home office. The productivity doesn't change really. And so you have to work with the men here too, that they make more in the household, that they take care of the kids and take parental leave. Then it could be helpful for families, I think.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a very important point. Again, there's kind of necessary to change the man and to bring equality in this, right? And I think this is clear that institutions and rules are important here as well to be changing, right? So that we capture these two things together. And then kind of the next megatrend we have, you mentioned this already, is kind of the demographic change, right? The way you put this is kind of, this might be a window of opportunity, right? Because now we have these pressures, but are there potential downsides as well? Or do you think kind of that will kind of, will be the advantage of the aging of societies for us?
I think for women it's mainly positive, I would say, because I mean it's open up. You have you need the women on the labor market, but you also some women are not very well paid today, and in care, for example, and maybe that will be more important in the future because of demographic change, and that probably put up the wages, and to maybe not the industry workers will be paid less compared to people working in care or in hospitals or something like that. And I think that's a good thing, and I think it's really mostly something positive for women.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So we have a couple of minutes left, so I want to give you the opportunity to ask questions. Please be short. And Nick, yeah, Dorothea, please start.
I mean, it has quite a lot to do with the people sitting in the top. I mean, the CEO, but also Aufsichtsrat, the people that are deciding who's coming up. I mean, that is at another reason is the culture of the company. I mean, are you open to change? Is you open? Have you influence from the world? So, for example, I have a French boss. Mercedes-Benz is another quite a lot of good things doing there. He's coming from Sweden. I think that this is very important, but also that you start quite early to set you set quotes, yes, but we normally say you have targets would be better, because I mean that you're really measuring how many women you have, and if those successful sort of companies, they're analyzing those targets also and seeing why are we losing women, why are we not promoting women to the top, are we not finding women at all. I mean, it's long work. I mean, you know quick fix, but
please use the microphone, because otherwise I think people can't hear you. So the question, lady in the front.
Thank you very much. My name is Wendy Mpendula from South Africa. I'm with my colleagues here from Gisma University. I'm an economist as well, but also a businesswoman. I'm actually excited with what Prof has said is happening in Sweden. because really, if all countries can adapt to that, it would really change the world. And what you said, Prof, for me, we're coming from South Africa. South Africa is in Africa. So I was shocked to find out that these disparities, the inequalities are just, it's something that is generic. I think we attribute to patriarchy and all those other things. So my question is the one that I would like to know, are you interested in doing any work in Africa, and what kind of work what can you be able to do so that we can, because we're still behind as well. I've done my research, my report was on the role of women in the decision making, and I was interviewing the women in the decision making of the security sector, which is SNDF, and they were telling us that women are just past the waters. When they get opportunities, they're scared. So some of the things that you're talking about, that sometimes get opportunities, but then if you're not ready, it really doesn't help. So I think women are actually the nurturers. They make things happen. You said it, you alluded to that psychologically, we still have a burden to carry, whilst we're still busy having to make sure that we still meet up at work. So it's what is in us, but also at the same time, like you said, it's a burden at some stage, because now you have to meet up and it becomes a problem for you. So yeah, I would like some interventions also for our side. I'm also representing an organization called African Progressive Women, where we're trying to get women to participate in the economy, because women are always sitting at the back seat. Yeah, thank you so much.
So Nicola, do you have any evidence how this in African countries? Has this improved? What is the situation there?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on Africa specifically, but I think that also in the development economics literature and also in the policy world by now, I think it's very recognized that we cannot generate growth without women, and growth is what we really need for Africa. And that thinking about how can we get women more involved in the business world, how can we make it easier for women to become self-employed, all these things, they play a really crucial role here. And I think it's also in the development agency world that kind of arrived, but I can imagine that on the ground you don't feel it to the extent that you should do it. And I would imagine that there's also a lot of heterogeneity of where we stand within different African countries. But I think, so the study I was citing for the US, which said for growth, the women were really important in the last 6 decades. I mean, that should be the potential lever, should be much higher even in Africa, where you start from lower level of growth, where women face many more hurdles than they do in Europe or in the US. And if you can help women there, I think that could give a real boost to growth.
Hande, so in the second.
Thank you. First of all, thanks a lot for the discussion. So my question is about norm shifts, social norm shifts. So as far as I understand, I mean, even though a norm shift happens via, let's say, a change in the law, still some people are not aware of it. And let me give you an example, a quick example. So basically, there was a paper some years ago published that was showing that, for instance, in Saudi Arabia, the women were allowed to, drive. And then they asked men whether it's appropriate to do so. And it seems people are much more progressive in their personal thoughts, like what should be done. So people should, the women should drive, but they at the same time believe that others believe they shouldn't. So there seems to be a missing link between the social norm and the personal norm in that sense. So what could be the strategies to actually improve this situation? That's my question.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting study, and it's a very interesting question. But I think what this shows is really that it's so important of what the government does. Because it might be that, people are actually kind of progressive and think it's good for women to do that, maybe also because it could be beneficial for the men if the women have more liberties and can get more things done. But they don't see that this happens on the societal level. And that's what I think what happens on the societal. I mean, norms will shift in any case, I think, but it can be much faster if the government is the one that stands up and says, we want this to happen. And I think also in that case, I mean, the treatment that they did in the paper was an individual information treatment, and because you can't do these real macro government level treatments, but it would be really interesting to see that. And there is, for example, There's interesting work in another domain, fertility, by Silvana Tenway, who showed that these fertility programs by the UN, also in the last, so in the 60s, 70s, where it was all about decreasing fertility, now we are going in the opposite direction, that these programs that they put out there, that they really had an effect. So it's, I think, governments, or in this case an international agency, can play a major role there in shifting these norms.
So one final question.
Hi, my name is Justyna Stepinska. I'm actually a sociologist here working at WZB. Thank you for the panel. I have one comment and maybe one question. And the comment is to the use of AI actually and the gender disparity, which actually we do see some negative consequences for women. Just to give you one, I think, number is the exposure to AI training. Women are exposed, on average 18% of women are exposed, whereas 36% of men. So we have these tiny insights that are already pointing actually to the direction that not necessarily AI is going to be, you know, the great equalizer. So this is to the comment, and my question actually goes to the topic of the session, which is the polarized time. So I was wondering whether you can maybe touch upon how is it different, and what does it, I mean, polarized times, we can probably define it differently, but nevertheless, is there something different about gender equality research from your perspective in this polarized time in comparison to, well, previous epochs or not polarized times that way, however you define it? So I'll appreciate that.
You want to say something about?
Well, I mean, about polarized time, I could say something. I mean, I think it's a difficult question. Of course, it's harmful for the women to a point. When you hate speech and all those kind of things, that, I mean, it's more difficult to stand up for women's rights. But if you see it you can see it in another way or two. I mean, we've been working in AllBright for 10 years about this question, and of course, this was a small change, getting better and better. But what we see now, okay, there's some companies and some countries that are backing down on it. Many men are more aggressive, protecting their privileges, but his discussion is there. And I think if you join discussion, if you have discussion more like this, and more women and more men, that I think these things are important, are starting to work for this and not take it for granted, it's not obvious, then you can have a positive push for changes. But about research, maybe it's Nicola, that's better to answer the questions.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think we could have an own conference on that question. What happens to gender issues and also other issues in these more polarized times? I mean, we see that in the US also when it comes to gender research. I think you see more backlash also in Germany and in other European countries. Where does it come from? How do we work with it? I mean, I think these are very important questions that we have to ask ourselves. Also, yeah, how do we deal with that, and how can we make sure that this movement that is pro women, that we keep it going, and that we get more arguments really that it's good for the economy and thereby also for the men. And I think we have to think about that harder now than we maybe had to do 5 years ago, and that is it's a big challenge, and we have to develop some answers, but I don't have them yet.
I think one aspect, and I think that's a good way to close the session, is that transfer is very important, right? So it's just a question how we can convey the results, which can bring positive effects, right? So we have learned that policy can change things, right? In Sweden, you have given examples, right? And I think there's more academic evidence by you, by other researchers, and the question is now, how can we transfer this? Not only to policymakers, it's important to report this to businesses and to lobby groups to make them clear that they need to lobby at the government to basically make things change, right? And when we talk about polarization, if there are other people out who are very populistic in their arguments, I think the more transparent we can be, the better. Yeah? Okay, I want to thank you a lot for coming, for your points, for your discussion. Thanks a lot, Nicola, Christian, and to the audience.
Thanks a lot.